fresh minds to work on. And these are not the big issues which are to be left for politicians, but these are some of the nitty-gritty details which could give a new meaning of many of these people. So take it as one example of a new deal, a global new deal, which is to be reinvented, if you like to deflate the bubbles. We have to reinvent the Schuman plan, to reinvent the notion of reconciliation. I was alluding to it. We have to do it in the EU proper as well. Again, we have to recall that euro is not just about the euro. Integration is not just about economics, but this is the bedrock of stability in Europe. And we have to widen this reconciliation, and we have to probably go as far as finding the Schumans and the Monets and the Adenauers of today for Asia, and it will have to be Asia who is doing that. We need to reinvent cooperative security as an area where we have to go back to the basics, of the late 1950s and 1960s, and to think about war prevention, because much is at stake. And we have to go back to the ideas and the proposals which still remain unfulfilled from the 1960s, and one of them is my former organization's job, the Test-Ban Treaty. Still, after more than 60 years of this idea put on the table, still it's an unfinished business. And there are many unfinished business, and I don't have the time to enumerate them. And we will have to go beyond the finishing of the unfinished business and to address the new challenges which are not necessarily in the weaponization area, but coming from the area of latency, where science and technology and industry are creating new headaches. And of course, at the same time, still we have to take care of the traditional and ever-increasing threats of terrorism. What is the most important in this area of reinventing cooperative security? That we really mean that might is not right. And I think that this will be the most difficult to do. But this is where we should go back to 1914. Go back to the last days of July, when even emperors were shocked by where the policies of not just years but decades did lead. And there was no way going back. So we have to apply a new approach, not the day after, because all the big treaties, all the big initiatives of arms control and disarmament grew out of big calamities. 1925 Geneva Protocol, First World War. All the treaties on weapons of mass destruction coming as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis shock. We need a recognition of cooperative security, not the day after, but the day before. This is the right place to think about these issues, and this is the right moment to think about how not to let the bubbles further grow, how to deflate them. And reconciliation is a key. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Mrs. Christine Beerley, Vice Chairman of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Since Solferino, the International Red Cross is always present to help where people is affected by armed conflict and natural disasters. 150 years ago, the Convention of Geneva has been signed, a convention for the amelioration of the conditions of the wounded in war. It was the start of one of the most positive and fascinating episodes in world history. We are proud and honored to introduce the Vice Chairman of the International Red Cross, Mrs. Christine Beerley. Mrs. Beerley started her political career in the Municipal Council of Biel in Switzerland. In 1991, she was elected to the upper house of the Swiss Parliament. She remained in the Parliament until 2003. In January 2008, Mrs. Beerley was appointed Vice President of the ICRC. One of her major concerns is to strengthen and develop good relationships within the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. Mrs. Beerley, may I kindly invite you to take the floor.
Dear Mayors, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are here not only to commemorate the horrific use of chlorine gas around Ypres 100 years ago. We are also here to look back on the journey the international community has since embarked on. And we are here to remember that we have not yet reached the goal of our journey to abolish all use of and completely eliminate weapons of mass destruction in law and in practice. Looking back at the history of international humanitarian law, it seems that the greatest atrocities, the greatest human catastrophes lead often to the broadest legislation. It was the overwhelming suffering and dying soldiers in the battlefields of Solferino over 150 years ago which prompted Henri Dunant to create the International Committee of the Red Cross and through it 1864, the Geneva Conventions. Similarly, in 1949, Geneva Conventions, and in particular the Fourth Geneva Convention, which was the first treaty to establish detailed rules to protect civilians in armed conflict, were responding to the atrocities of the Second World War. And in between, it was the attack right here, 100 years ago, poisoning soldiers with chlorine gas, which led to the creation of the 1925 Geneva Protocol, strengthening existing international legislation by prohibiting the use of chemical and biological weapons in warfare. I'm proud to say that the ICRC played an important role in the Geneva Protocol, not least through its 1918 appeal. Regrettably, the words of this appeal remain actually fitting. It said, "We protest with all strength of our being against the method of warfare which we can only describe as criminal." It seems that humanity sometimes needs the unimaginable to happen to prevent from happening it again. And so, while we commemorate these events of a century ago, we must not forget our duty to the people who died and suffered, and our duty to those alive today. The challenge of our times is not only the creation of legal frameworks where there are none, it is ensuring that those which are in place are respected. In 1918, soldiers unlocked 6,000 gas cylinders and used the wind towards enemy lines as a means of distribution of deadly chlorine mixture. And yet, in 2013 and 2014, despite the outright prohibition of these weapons now strengthened by the 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention, people in Syria have again borne the horrendous cost of attacks with deadly nerve agents and chlorine gas. Not only the same category of weapon, but even the same toxic substance as 100 years ago. Actually, we have reason to believe that just last month, in Idlib, Syria, chlorine gas was once more used. Now, we could think that the legal prohibition has disappointed, that every violation of the law means completely failure. On the contrary, the strength of any norm is tested in its breach by how the international community reacts to the violations. The broad condemnation of the shocking use of chemical weapons in August 2013 and in the past weeks indeed confirm the universal value of the prohibition of chemical weapons. The ICRC opposes the use of poison under any circumstances, and for this reason, acutely aware of the continuing interest among some states in the development of new toxic weaponry, we also issued a public call to prevent the use of toxic chemical weapons for law enforcement. We did this in February of 2013. Yet our task is much greater than solely upholding the absolute prohibition of the use of chemical weapons under international humanitarian law. We must consider the grave danger from all weapons of mass destruction. International humanitarian law imposes strict rules on the choice of means and methods of warfare. Weapons must not have indiscriminate effects against civilians. They must not be of a nature to cause superfluous injury and unnecessary suffering to combatants. Weapons of mass destruction, such as biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons, do not comply with these rules. The human suffering they create is not tolerable, and the humanitarian consequences aren't acceptable. This is the lesson we learned from Ypres. This is the duty Ypres left to us. Another already prohibited means of warfare that has the potential to raise the specter of mass destructions are biological weapons. It is important to recall that many major powers pursued extensive efforts to harness the destructive power of disease for military purposes from the late 1930s through to the late 1960s. And some countries even continued to develop such weapons after the agreement of the Biological and Toxic Weapon Convention in 1972. Luckily, one might say the use of biological weapons in armed conflict has been relatively limited, but such military programs were not without their victims, including many civilians and people exposed to infectious substances as part of military research programs. The potential danger from the intentional spread of disease is only too clearly demonstrated by the widespread damage inflicted by natural occurring infectious disease outbreaks, particularly in regions where healthcare facilities are under strain. There is a frightening real possibility that advances in science and technology could offer even greater opportunities for those who would seek to misuse biology in the future. I would like to turn to a different kind of weapon of mass destruction, one for which we still do not have adequate legal bans: nuclear weapons. The International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has long been concerned about nuclear weapons. ICRC delegates witnessed the impact that these weapons had on the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Already in September of that year, the ICRC publicly voiced the necessity that nuclear weapons be banned. From 1948 on, the entire International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, through its international conference, called for the prohibition of weapons of mass destruction in general and of nuclear weapons in particular. We hope that the upcoming review conference for the Treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons will be a turning point for progress in this area. Now is the time to act. with urgency and determination to bring the era of nuclear weapons to an end. If we wait for a nuclear catastrophe to happen, there might not be anyone left to draw the lessons from it. Given past developments of chemical, biological and nuclear weapons, we must remain alert to any new weapon of mass destruction that might emerge from the terrible marriage of warfare and science. In 2002 already, the ICRC appealed to political and military authorities to strengthen their commitment to international humanitarian law norms which prohibit the hostile use of biological agents and to work together to subject potentially dangerous biotechnology to effective controls. But while seeking to prevent future horrors, we must reserve sufficient energy to tackle the humanitarian consequences we are witnessing today that are a direct result of the use and misuse of weapons. If we measure destruction in terms of the real humanitarian cost, then perhaps the most effective weapons of mass destructions are hiding in plain sight. Conventional rockets, bombs, and missiles, particularly those with large explosive power, those with a wide area of impact, and those that are ungated, are responsible for the overwhelming majority of civilian deaths in today's conflicts. This is especially marked since the shift from the open battlefield of the past to today's conflicts in densely populated areas of worlds, towns and cities. It is for this reason that the ICRC is putting renewed emphasis on concerns about the use of explosive weapons, particularly in densely populated areas. We recognize and commend the great achievements in legally limiting the use of or eliminating indiscriminate and inhuman means of warfare, but we still have a great deal of work to do in ensuring that the legal frameworks are respected everywhere. I would like to conclude by recalling the strict constraints of international law on weapons of mass destruction. There must be no doubt that the prohibitions of the use of chemical and biological weapons are absolute. They are a part of customary international humanitarian law which applies to all parties to all armed conflicts anywhere in the world. As for nuclear weapons, we must be clear that it is difficult to envisage how any use of these weapons could be compatible with the general rules of international humanitarian law, not to mention the principles of humanity and the dictate of public conscience. But our duty goes beyond expanding and solidifying the legal framework, limiting the use of weapons of mass destruction. The unambiguous law must be translated into equally clear actions by states, their armies, and by non-state armed groups to comply with these legal frameworks. The legal prohibition of the gas, which killed thousands of soldiers and civilians here 100 years ago, did not prevent the attacks with the same substance just 2 years ago or even just 1 month ago. It is therefore our duty to work not only for the law to exist, but also for it to be understood, to be accepted, and to be respected. The historic aberration done in this place imposes this duty upon us. Thank you very much.
I have the honor to introduce now OPCW Deputy Director General, Mrs. Grace Azir-Watam. Mrs. Azir-Watam has had a long career in the Sri Lankan diplomatic service, during which she has held several positions in Colombo, most recently as Director General for South Asia and the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. She has served overseas in Pakistan, Germany, and as ambassador to Nepal and the Netherlands. In this last capacity, Ambassador Azir-Watam was concurrently the Sri Lankan Permanent representative to the UPCW, where she served inter alia as vice chairperson of the 14th Conference of State Parties in 2009. Mrs. Azir-Watam, I kindly invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much for that introduction. There are places and moments where history has been decided. As we look back upon the use of weapons of mass destruction, Hiroshima is one such place. Nagasaki is another. Ypres, I would guess, stands alongside these places in history. Today's theme says, a century of weapons of mass destruction, enough. Indeed, it is enough. Let us make these words into action. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It was in Ypres where a dark period of warfare had been recorded in history's books. For on 22nd April 1915, a 4-mile trench filled with unwitting soldiers came under chemical attack of chlorine gas, could not understand what they were choking from or what many would soon die from. Nearly 6,000 canisters of chlorine gas were opened, and winds carried the poison gas towards the unsuspecting soldiers. Within minutes, men were tearing at their faces and their throats, desperately gasping for breath. First-hand reports depict a grisly scene of complete annihilation, with bodies of soldiers scattered everywhere. One recollection says even the animals had come out of their houses and holes to die. Recognized from the outset as an inhuman weapon that killed indiscriminately, chemical weapons had been used extensively. Throughout the 20th century, several countries amassed enormous stockpiles of chemical weapons, and such weapons grew more lethal and terrifying over time. Yet, even amid the expansion of chemical arsenals, many were of the view that such weapons were cruel and should be banned. A growing global consensus for the prohibition of chemical weapons culminated in 1997, when a treaty, the Chemical Weapons Convention, charted a verifiable course to the complete global disarmament of chemical weapons. Since 1997, when the OPCW was created to implement the convention, the organization has made significant strides towards a future free of chemical weapons. Not only does the convention prohibit the production, possession, and use of an entire class of weapons of mass destruction, but it does so in a non-discriminatory manner. The convention requires all countries possessing chemical weapons to declare and destroy their stockpiles. There are no provisions that allow some states to possess chemical weapons while others cannot. And all member countries must put into place national legislations to ensure that chemistry is used for peaceful purposes, strictly for peaceful purposes within their jurisdiction. Today, the OPCW has verified the destruction of 87% of all declared chemical weapons. Let me elaborate a little. Of our 190 member states, 8 have declared possession of chemical weapons. Among these, 3 have completed destruction of their stockpiles. Among the remaining, Iraq has finalized a destruction plan for destroying the remnants of its chemical weapons program. And Libya has destroyed its Category 1 chemical weapons, Category 2 and 3 to be destroyed. Amid an accelerated time frame, 98% of Syria's chemical weapons have been eliminated, including all of its stocks of sulfur mustard and main precursor chemicals. Countries with largest share of world's chemical weapons stockpiles, Russia and the US, have committed to ensure complete destruction of their programs by 2020 and 2023 respectively. The work to destroy chemical weapon stocks, particularly among the large possessor countries, is incredibly labor and resource intensive. By early next decade, we expect to herald in a new era as we will mark a disarmament achievement that will be without parallel in history. But our work and that of the states parties does not end there, and verifying the destruction of chemical weapons is not our sole activity. Our states parties must open their industry facilities to routine inspections by the OPCW inspectors and submit declarations regarding transfer of scheduled chemicals to assure secure trade in dual-use chemicals and to ensure they are not used to create weapons. Our inspectors are working around the globe inspecting such facilities to ensure that chemicals are produced exclusively for peaceful purposes. Since 1997, we have carried out more than 2,005 such industry inspections in more than 87 countries. To ensure a world free of chemical weapons into future, the OPCW must focus its efforts to stop the re-emergence of these brutal weapons. We sustain networks of scientists and specialists to make sure we are at the vanguard of advances in science and technology. Advances that could have important consequences for the verification and implementation of the convention. We assist our member countries to optimize their response in the unfortunate event of a chemical attack or incident, and further help them to prepare for any incidents involving the release of toxic chemicals. We foster international cooperation on the peaceful applications of chemical science through training and assistance programs across the globe. We are intensifying our outreach activities on the peaceful applications with industry, civil society, universities, and schools to advocate for the peaceful use of chemical science. And we do all this amidst an increasingly complex strategic environment in which the rise of non-state actors, globalization of the chemical industry, and rapid advances in science and technology and communication that will present new challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, amid the successes of the convention, there remain some key challenges and threats to the chemically secure environment. The Chemical Weapons Convention is among the most widely ratified treaties in the world, in the history as well. However, 6 countries, Myanmar, Israel, these 2 countries are signatory countries, Angola, South Sudan, Egypt, and North Korea have not yet joined the Chemical Weapons Convention to affirm their commitment to the prohibition of these weapons. However, Myanmar, the Parliament of Myanmar has passed a bill to join the convention. It's a good news. And they were working on the document, and we have received information by May they will be joining the convention. Today there was another good news. Angola, the Angolan parliament also discussed about it, and they have approved a bill to join the convention. So we haven't received official communication from them. This information has to be verified. However, we are very happy to see that something is happening. And at the moment we have 106 parties. If Myanmar and Angola joins, then we will be left with 4 other countries to deal with in order to encourage them to join the convention as soon as possible. And we should not underestimate the threat posed by terrorists accessing chemical weapons. In this regard, you may recall the use of sarin in Japan, in Tokyo subway. This reminds us of these risks. Though their use in large-scale conflict is likely a thing of the past, non-state actors represent an emerging and complex threat to a completely secure future. By now, we are well versed in the stated intentions of the terrorist groups to attain and employ the weapons of mass destruction. The threat of chemical terrorism is a major concern of the OPCW at the moment. Alarmingly, there have been new allegations that toxic chemicals are being used as a weapon in Syria. We are collecting and reviewing information relating to these allegations and will decide on a course of action based on the analysis. The fact-finding mission established 1 year ago has already substantiated earlier allegations and continues to work with the support of states parties and the United Nations Security Council. The Syrian mission has demonstrated many things, but perhaps most relevant to Ypres, it demonstrated that the consensus against the use of toxic chemicals as weapons is by no means diminished over time. The international community's revulsion against these weapons and our commitment to eradicate them is firm and unaltered. Given that our mission is to ensure the prohibition of chemical weapons is implemented among our states parties, we are working to strengthen national jurisdiction to better detect and prosecute criminal chemical activity. We are building bridges with international organizations and frameworks to strengthen global security and capacity against chemical terrorism. We are intensifying activities to monitor the production and trade of toxic chemicals. Ladies and gentlemen, chemical weapons have inflicted torment and suffering in many corners of the world over the last 100 years. The lessons of Ypres are its enduring legacy. For in the darkest moments of war, amid the most abhorrent uses of chemistry, the world got its first glimpse of the indiscriminate and forbidding use of chemical weapons and their power to maim and kill. Each day bring us one step closer to the reality of a world free of chemical weapons. Yesterday, the OPCW and its states parties honored the memory of all victims of chemical warfare and commemorated the centenary of the first large-scale use of chemical weapons here in Ypres in this building. During this commemorative event, our 190 states parties issued an Ypres declaration, a lasting testimony reaffirming their determination to completely exclude the use of chemical weapons and underscoring their condemnation against any such use in the future. In this one-page text, 190 countries reiterated their commitment made to the Convention towards a future free of chemical weapons. Though the scars on land and among nations have healed, the scars of chemical weapons are still fresh in the minds and bodies of many. The Ypres Declaration is intended as a sincere tribute to their honor, and its display in this ancient town will be a reminder of our shared commitments for decades and centuries to come. I thank you for your attention.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, here concludes the academical part of the commemoration of the centenary of the first gas attack. We take now the coaches which will bring us to the places of commemoration, the Cross of Reconciliation, the Brooding Soldier, and the Men in Gate. The coaches will part at 4:20. In the meantime, when leaving the hall, we can listen now to the third musical intermezzo of the students of the Academy of Music and Word, and we are very grateful for their performance. Thank you very much.
Hier